You know, there are many gaps between scriptures when you read the Bible. But here to talk with me about one that you may not have thought of is author and lecturer Bill Salus. Hi, Bill.
Gary, it's great to be back on your program.
And it's great to talk to you about a gap. And a lot of people have not thought about the particular gap that we're going to speak of today. It's a gap in our future. That is to say, in the future of planet Earth. We're going to be gone, who knows when, but hopefully very soon, in the rapture of the church. What happens right after that? The day after that? Bill's done a lot of thinking about what happens after the rapture of the church, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, it's interesting. I call it a gap. I call it after the rapture, post-rapture, but before the tribulation, so pre-trib, the post-rapture, pre-tribulation gap period, because what starts the tribulation? It's not the rapture. It is the confirmation of the false covenant spoken about in Daniel 9:27.
Indeed. And when you say confirmation, it's kind of fascinating to me because, and I'm going to turn back here in a moment, and I'm going to look at Daniel chapter 9 and read perhaps one of the most familiar passages in all Scripture. Daniel 9:27 says, "He shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week." What a loaded sentence that is. He being the Antichrist. Confirm, what does confirm mean here? And who are the many? And what is this week? And how does that fit with what you're talking about?
Right. Yeah, and that's a very important proof text concerning this false covenant. And this false covenant is so critically important. The language on it, the true content of it must be so devastating because it triggers the final 7-year tribulation period, the worst in mankind's history, years upon the earth. And Daniel 9 gives us some important information, but it doesn't give us the whole story. A lot of people relate to that primarily, but they need to also look at Isaiah 28, verses 15 and verses 18, which gives us more details about that covenant. But that is the covenant that starts the tribulation. So when the rapture happens, in the twinkling of an eye, in that same split second, people will be left behind, people that we know and love who, and you know who I'm talking about, it could be a family member, a spouse, someone in your sphere of influence, a coworker, who has not accepted Jesus Christ. Therefore, they won't be raptured, and they're going to be plunged into a perilous gap period.
Isaiah 28 pronounces woe upon Israel. And the reason for it is because the people have said, we've made a covenant with death. Isaiah 28:15 says, you have said, we've made a covenant with death, and with hell are we at agreement. How can you make a covenant with death and hell? And how does this tie into the other covenant that we just looked at in Daniel chapter 9?
Mm-hmm. Right, so here's the other accompaniment of these verses. Daniel said that the Antichrist will confirm the covenant. Kind of like what Bill Clinton did between Israel and Jordan. He confirmed a covenant to guarantee Israel's security because they've been in wars with Jordan in the past. So we've got a guy here who Israel's going to trust, and some other party who Isaiah is saying is death and Sheol, that these parties will trust this Antichrist. We've got to put a face on death and Sheol, of course, and that sort of thing. But the motivation is always also discussed by Isaiah. What does Isaiah say they're motivated? They're trying to avoid. What does it say there in the rest of the verse?
Well, it says in the rest of the verse, you have said, we've made a covenant with death, with hell are we at agreement. When the overflowing scourge shall pass through, it shall not come unto us, for we have made lies our refuge, and under falsehood have we hid ourselves. In other words, they're saying there is a scourge coming.
Right, so we've got to identify who death and hell is. We've got to identify what the scourge is that Israel is concerned about for their national security, because that's where we have to start digging into the book of Revelation, what happens in this gap, because whatever's happening to lead up to Israel's motivation to sign that false covenant is what we've got to understand. What prompts them to go to the bargaining table with death and Sheol, whoever they might be, which we point out in the book, it's the harlot world religion.
Yeah, and these are rough times, apparently, that Isaiah is writing about. And if they see a scourge coming and they want to protect themselves from it, there must be some consciousness in their minds of something really bad that's in their future.
Right, and let's also set the stage too, because by the time Israel's concerned about this overflowing scourge, we've got probably a very different Israel than we see today on the map. An Israel who has probably been victorious in the concluding Arab-Israeli War of Psalm 83. The Israeli Defense Forces have proven themselves to be an exceedingly great army, fending off that war. And then you've also probably got on the heels of that shortly thereafter the Ezekiel 38 Gog of Magog invasion, too formidable for the Israeli Defense Forces, but that's okay because God stops that with an earthquake, fire, and brimstone. So we find Israel at that point in time in a whole entirely different national mindset. And yet now they're concerned about something that's going on in the world after the rapture that prompts them to confirm a covenant so they can avoid this overflowing scourge. And I think that's when you have to get into what are these prophecies that lay themselves out in this gap.
And what you just said is really interesting to me because we as Bible-believing Christians have been watching Israel going back to the late 19th century, the 20th century. We've watched as God did certain things to Israel at various stages along the line, Israeli statehood, various wars, the Temple Mount War, 1967. We've watched all this with great, great interest, trying to discern, well, how close are we to seeing the culmination of the church? Of course, we're looking for the rapture. We're looking for our Lord to come back and clean up Dodge City, if you will, because things are just getting worse and worse and worse and worse. So we're watching the progress of all this, but what we just read in Isaiah, it seems to indicate that something very, very bad is on the horizon. That's not currently true of Israel. I think the attitude of the average Israeli today is we're going to make it. We're doing okay. We've got our weaponry. We've got a great intelligence system. We know what we're doing, and we're confident.
We just talked about Israel's national mindset in the nearby future after these prophetic wars. Let's step outside now and look at the Gentile world's mindset at this time, that Israel's of its mindset. And we have to draw our attention to 2 Thessalonians 2, because what right now, as bad as things are in the world, there are three main things that are being restrained. The church, they're so bad, the church is actually being protected from them. And because the church is on earth, the world also at large is being protected from them. But a point is coming in the near future, correlating with the rapture of the church, where Satan will have no more restraint. And this was pointed out in 2 Thessalonians 2, and he will be able to forward his closing arguments upon humanity. Do you want to read 2 Thessalonians 2?
Well, I'll read that because, and by the way, 2 Thessalonians 2 is one of the key passages in the Bible, just like Daniel 9, Isaiah 28. This one is really right up there. And the Thessalonians are concerned. And they write Paul saying, well, what's going on? And when's the Lord coming back? And how much evil will we see before he does? They're really, I think, legitimately concerned, as we are. We always ask the question, well, Lord, how much is going to happen before you come back? Natural question. And Paul says in 2 Thessalonians 2:2, I don't want you to be shaken in mind. I don't want you to be troubled, neither in spirit, by word, by letter from us, as that the day of Christ is at hand. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. So this is Paul's way of saying something's going to happen, and let me tell you carefully what it is. First,
and he goes on to talk about what's being restrained until that happens, and that's the danger right there.
Yeah, and this son of perdition is going to oppose and exalt himself in the next verse here above all that is called God or worshipped. He's going to sit in the temple of God. He's going to show himself as God. And then he says, You know what is withholding that he might be revealed in his time. So there is a withholding spirit at this point in time. The mystery of iniquity, that is the mystery of lawlessness, is working. Only he who now restrains will continue to be to restrain until he be taken out of the way. So that kind of sets the scene here. There is, at that time, lawlessness is turned loose.
Right, and inside of the book, the Apocalypse Road book that you'll be offering on the show, I go through all the usages of lawlessness in the New Testament, and we understand that lawlessness is sin according to John, but that's not a mystery. What we're talking about is there's a mystery of lawlessness being restrained. Lawlessness, when it's unrestrained, is sin metastasized. It'll create global chaos. It'll be an incubation period where the world will clamor for its hero, which goes on, Paul says in Second Thessalonians, says, then the lawless one will be revealed under that backdrop. And he goes on and he talks about that'll be according to the workings of Satan with all supernatural signs and lying wonders. So these are the three things being restrained right now that are devastating, that are going to happen once the church is gone. This comes into play immediately. Satan's been concocting a plan for his closing argument. As soon as he knew when Paul wrote this, he started thinking, I'm going to have my time in the sun to deceive mankind and put forward my arguments.
And Israel at that time, and I think Isaiah 28 speaks to this, Israel is going to say, wait a minute, we've got to save ourselves. What are we going to do? And they do the wrong thing.
Right, and so what's interesting to me, because when we talk about this gap after the rapture, before the tribulation, we don't have a specified time frame, just like we had no specified time frame on the church age. It'll probably last for several years when you look at the events that will more than likely fit into them. So, for instance, the church is raptured, and we would see that as a picture of us in heaven in Revelation chapter 4 and 5. You and I have talked about this on past shows. And what happens? Well, Revelation 6 happens. The scroll gets open, and the first thing Satan does without restraint is the lawless one now comes on the scene, and that's the Antichrist of the white horseman. Now, he's on there, and it says he's coming out conquering and to conquer. He's going to start embark upon his threefold campaign, which will take a little bit of time. He's going to become a political persona that Israel will trust to confirm a covenant. He's going to be a military leader because he goes to wars in Daniel 11. But he's also going to be a superior religious leader because ultimately in Revelation 13, he's going to put his system of worship together, the mark of the beast, etc. So he comes on the scene, and we have this digression of events. I personally, Gary, deviate a little bit from our colleagues, and I believe that the first 5 seal judgments actually open up during the gap period after the rapture. They carry over into the tribulation, but for sound reasons, I believe that the first 5 seal judgments actually happen during this gap period.
Okay, now let me just restate what you said. The rapture comes, and the clock starts ticking until the beginning of the tribulation. There's a period, an unknown period of time in there, and you place the initial seals in that gap.
That's right. And so we see initially when the scroll's opened, the restraint is removed, and the first thing Satan does is put his point man on the scene. And now lawlessness is abounding, and the second seal opens, the fiery red horseman who wields a great sword, which represents wars. As lawlessness abounds, chaos engulfs the world.
Would these be, for example, the Ezekiel 38 war? Could that occur at this time?
Well, I have to think about that as well, because if the Psalm 83 war and Ezekiel 38 war have not happened prior, they'd be perfect candidates to be fitting in here. Now, if they've happened prior, this could be India going after Pakistan, North Korea going after South Korea, although North Korea is in trouble already now as we sit here and tape this. We'll see what's next on their agenda. But, in other words, peace is taken from the earth, and it creates a clamorous situation where you have the third seal, where you've got famines, pestilence, and scarcities, the black horseman, dark time upon the earth. This is what happens in the aftermath of wars. Someone has to deal with that. It says basically it's 2 days' wages just to buy a day's worth of food. It talks about a quart of wheat and 3 quarts of barley, but don't harm the oil or the wine on the third horseman. So now you've got a system that now needs to be in check. You've got to have a global order come in, and that's the fourth horseman. Someone's going to have to deal with the problems spreading through the world. Remember, supernatural deception is going on. There's no restraint. Lawlessness is being revealed. And now shows up death and Hades, who, by the way, you just read in Isaiah 28.
Right.
This is our correlation here. Now we've got the other participating party, we'll call them the signatory of the false covenant. Israel is going to sign a covenant with the fourth horseman. So now we've got an indication, listen, the tribulation can't even start until the fourth horseman if this assessment is correct.
Well, that's really interesting because the first horseman is the Antichrist. The fourth one is death and Hades, and Isaiah talks about making a covenant with death and Hades, so this kind of puts it all in a package.
We do. We've got the confirmer of the covenant came out with the first white horseman. Daniel 9, the Antichrist confirms the covenant. Israel, of course, already exists. They're one of the signatories of the false covenant. But what is the scourge and who is the other party? Well, the scourge is being perpetrated, it looks like, with death and Hades, because it says in the fourth horseman, it says that they have authority. Why don't you read Revelation 6 dealing with the fourth horseman of the apocalypse so we can really put a graphic look on this, who they are.
Well, I'll read verse 8 of Revelation 6. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse. And by the way, parenthetically, the word pale there in Greek is chlori, which means pale green, which implies a kind of a ghastly quality. You know, when you think of a kind of a semi-dark room that's pale green color, it's sort of like reminds you of death. Pale green horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. And power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth, and I know you have something to say about that, to kill with the sword, with hunger, with death, with the beasts of the earth. All hell breaks loose, to use an old expression.
Right, so the second horseman, the fiery red horseman, had a great sword. But this culprit, the fourth horseman, has sword, famines, pestilences. He's got multiple means through which to kill. And so when it says that the fourth horseman shows up on the scene, death and hell, which happens to be in correlation with Isaiah's death and hell, the other party to the false covenant,
Right.
they have authority over a quarter of the earth to kill via those multiple means. A lot of people have taught this in the past, that death and Hades kills a quarter of the earth, a couple billion people. That's not technically what it says. In comparison, Revelation chapter 9, the sixth trumpet, says that those judgments will kill a third of mankind. This is not what that says.
Right.
So what you've got, in my estimation, is a network of a harlot world religion that's in place that the Antichrist embraces. So you have this unholy church and state relationship, and when you draw your attention to Revelation 17, the harlot world religion, it says it sits on the beast, Revelation 17 verse 3. Revelation 17 verse 7 says the beast, the Antichrist, carries her. So it's lucrative now. We've got a system now showing up in the fourth horseman to deal with the problems going on in the world and to perpetrate this lie, this false agenda, this false gospel, counterfeit gospel. And then it gets really interesting because we don't know who she's killing or how many she's killing. And then we get a big clue in the fifth seal. Gary, do you want to read about the fifth seal?
Well, the fifth seal is very, very interesting because it involves an altar. And we need to talk about that altar. When he had opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of them that were slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. And then, this is very key in the 10th verse, and they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth? So you really have a couple of things there. You have the altar and the question, How long, O Lord?
And so we have to put this into perspective. They are being martyred for their faith and their testimony in Jesus Christ. And they're already slain, and they're under the altar.
Yeah.
And so these are people who become believers after the rapture, because now we're dealing with the post-rapture, pre-tribulation gap period. So and again, if the rapture would happen today, folks, these would be people that you probably know right now and who have not become believers yet. And hopefully they'll become a believer shortly thereafter. But unfortunately now they find themselves perhaps falling into the fifth seal category. And so they are slain for their faith. But they ask that provocative question, not out of ignorance, but how long, O Lord, until you will avenge our blood on the culprit, death and Hades, that has just slain us? And that tells me, Gary, that they have not been slain during the tribulation period. The false covenant has not been confirmed yet. That starts the 7-year tribulation period. Because if so, these people would be able to actually calendar the days. They would know how long. They would not need to ask that question. It would seem like a necessary question.
So how long, O Lord, till you avenge our blood is really the question. How long until what?
Confirmation of the false covenant. Because once the confirmation of the false covenant happens, you got 7 years left to nullify the need to even know how long, because now you know.
So at this point in time then, according to your way of thinking, that covenant has not been signed.
Not up to that point.
Because it is the signing of the covenant that definitely starts the clock ticking on the 7 years.
Right, so you have Israel's in place now by the time of the fifth seal saints. The confirmer of the covenant, the Antichrist, is on the scene, first white horseman. The other signatory participating party, death and Sheol, who's sweeping through the earth with an overflowing scourge, and people who dissent from her are being killed like the Christians. And this is a harlot world religion. In Revelation 17:6, it says, she is drunk with the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus, and the Jews don't want it to read, drunk with the blood of the saints, the martyrs of Jesus, and the blood of the Jews. So they're going to say, we need to sign this politically expedient deal with this harlot. And the reason they sign that is because they have purposes. They want to build their temple, and in so doing, they will hasten the coming of the Messiah. They don't believe that Jesus was the Messiah. They think that when they build the temple, he will come. And when he comes, he'll deal with that problem. They're not believing in the harlot. They're going to want to reinstate their Mosaic law. The fifth seal saints aren't believing in the harlot's gospel, and they're dying for their faith. So you got this dynamic going on with the Jews, the general Gentile world, spirited by the harlot, being fueled by the Antichrist and the political system. And then you got the believers. And it's a period of martyrdom, and the Jews don't want to be part of that period of martyrdom.
And so they make a covenant with the wrong people.
That's right. And what does Isaiah 28 verse 18 say? He goes on to say that that covenant is going to be annulled.
Well, I'll have to go back and just read that. And your covenant with death shall be annulled. Mm-hmm. And your agreement with hell shall not stand. Mm-hmm. Well, those are harsh words when you really stop and look at them. When the overflowing scourge shall pass through, then ye shall be trodden down by it. And there we have that scourge.
Well, there's two phases of the overflowing scourge, Isaiah 28 verse 15, which you read, and Isaiah 28 verse 18. Israel is trying to avoid the initial phase of the overflowing scourge being perpetrated by the harlot world religion. They sign a covenant. They trust the Antichrist to confirm a covenant between them. The harlot trusts the Antichrist because she's essentially in relationship with him. Remember, she's sitting on the Antichrist. So they come to terms. The Antichrist confirms it. Isaiah is warning that that is going to turn against you, because what will happen is the Antichrist will have the 10 kings desolate the harlot in the mid part of the tribulation. That's in Revelation 17:16. She'll be gone, and then he's going to go into the temple. The abomination of desolation will occur in the Jewish temple, which will exist at that time, and he will abominate it and bring an end to the sacrifices and offerings, and then he's going to try to commit genocide on the Jewish people, we know, in the second half of the tribulation. So what happens is the overflowing scourge now comes into the temple. The harlot's now gone, one of the parties. The Jews are now going to be persecuted. That's why Isaiah is trying to warn them, don't be hasty. He actually says that in the verses of Isaiah 28, verses 16 and 17. Don't be hasty. This is where this is going.
And so that brings us then to the sixth seal, and we don't have time really to deal with that, except right at the end of it, it says, for the great day of his wrath is come, who shall be able to stand?
Right, so now we're getting into the wrath of God.
And now we're at the time of the beginning of the tribulation.
Right, and so I think one of the reasons some people struggle with the timing of the rapture, and there's this push now towards a mid-trib or now a pre-wrath argument, is they say, look, the wrath of God actually starts at the sixth seal. So if the seals are in the tribulation, we have a mid-trib scenario or a pre-wrath scenario. I would say, listen, if I'm correct, we have a pre-trib rapture and we have a gap. We don't have to worry about a pre-wrath scenario. That doesn't really fit if my thesis is correct.
And let me just pick up my Bible here and look at Daniel 9. And by the way, Daniel 9, 24 through 27 is said by many to be one of the very key prophecies in the whole Bible. It just lays out the whole thing. The 70 weeks prophecy. And And in 9:27 it says, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And I'll just read that phrase because we have he here. Everybody agrees that's the Antichrist.
Correct.
He will confirm or augment a covenant for 1 week, which is a Shavua, which is a 7-year period. And there you have the 7 years tribulation. But you've discovered a lot more in it than most people, I think, bring out.
Yeah, well, when most people teach on the false covenant, that is the main proof text they go to, and we get some really important details in there. It says he confirms, the Antichrist is a confirmer of the covenant, not necessarily he's a party of it or the drafter of it. We don't know that, but he just confirms it with Israel and some other party. They call it the many. It's for 7 years, like you said, and in the middle of it, he violates it. He goes into the Jewish temple and stops the sacrifice and offerings. But we have more proof text on that. Matter of fact, you might want to read the other proof text on it written a century prior by Isaiah in chapter 28, Isaiah 28, verse 15, which talks about Israel's motivation, who the other party is, and that it's done in lies and falsehood.
And I'm going to do that right now, Isaiah 28:15, which, by the way, let me start with 14 because that builds the drama, if you will. Wherefore, hear the word of the Lord, ye scornful men that rule this people which is Jerusalem. Because ye have said, we have made a covenant with death, and with hell are we at agreement. When the overflowing scourge shall pass through, it shall not come unto us. For we have made lies our refuge, and under falsehood we have hid ourselves. Woo, strong words.
Yeah, what Isaiah is doing for us here, enhancing our full understanding, a different camera angle on this false covenant.
Yeah.
He's putting a face on the other signatory, the other party. I call him the signatory. Israel's one, death and Hades. Death and Sheol. You just read the translation that used the word hell. A lot of the translations use the Hebrew word Sheol for the same thing.
Yeah, I'm reading the King James, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, so, and they sound intangible, but the reality is we can actually put a face on them, and we're going to make a connection in this show with death and Hades, the fourth horseman of the apocalypse. So Israel is signing a covenant with death and Sheol to avoid some overflowing scourge that's sweeping through the earth, being perpetrated by death and Sheol. That's why they covenant with them. And it's done in lies and falsehood. It is a false covenant. And what I believe is being said there is that Israel knows what they're signing on for it's politically expedient, and we'll explain why when we understand the true content of that false covenant. One important point, though, what you read, and I'm glad you read the prior verse 14.
Yeah.
God's calling them scornful rulers. If you read all of Isaiah 28, they have missed it. They haven't understood the Word of God as precept upon precept, line upon line, and stuff like that. And now they're taking the Jewish nation down the wrong path, is really what he's saying there. They're scornful rulers, and it's very fascinating. But that's important information, that Isaiah 28, verse 15.
Now, let's talk about the signing of the covenant, because when you talk about the 7-year false covenant, naturally we're talking about the Antichrist being a signatory, but you're saying it's not just the Antichrist alone. Who are the signatories, the covenant? This is a very important part of your thesis.
Yeah, so for instance, a confirmer of a covenant, we'll use examples in modern history. Jimmy Carter was a confirmer of a covenant in 1979 between Egypt and Israel. Bill Clinton was a confirmer of a covenant between Israel and Jordan in 1994, I believe it was. An Antichrist is someone that's going to be trusted by Israel to confirm a covenant, and death and Sheol, who represents death and Hades, and we'll get into that face in just a moment. They're going to be trusted by these parties to confirm this covenant. So basically what you've got is the party is Israel, the confirmer is the Antichrist, and then the other party is death and Sheol. And so now we've got the details of who's involved and what the motivation is.
Now, we're going to talk about who's involved, and right now, as we talk, I'm going to turn my Bible back to the Apocalypse. That is the book of Revelation. And again, what we're talking about here is a period of time between the rapture of the church and the beginning of the 7-year tribulation. And Bill has worked long and hard to try to fill in the blanks, if you will. 20, 30 years ago, it was very common, and I'm going to reiterate this for a reason, it's very common for people to have no gap at all. Just the rapture occurs, And then the very next day, you got the 7-year tribulation going. Well, a moment's thought just demolishes that idea. Much has to happen before that covenant can be confirmed. So let's go with that.
Yeah, because what's happening is that, Israel doesn't just randomly say, let's sign some devastating covenant that triggers the final 7-year time clock. Something is happening, sweeping through the world. Isaiah says it's an overflowing scourge that has got Israel concerned about its security, and they feel that the way they can avoid this escape it is to sign this covenant. And so it's a very critical bit of information that we look at here.
So the overflowing scourge, what is that? How should we address that idea?
Well, as we try to put a face on death and Hades, death and Sheol, we have a correlation that shows up in the book of the Apocalypse in Revelation chapter 6 of the fourth horseman. And matter of fact, why don't you read the Revelation 6 about the fourth horseman? And I believe that we're going to find out that is actually the harlot world religion. The sequence of events, just real quickly as you get ready to read it. The churches, we believe, is already raptured in heaven when the seal judgments are opened, and the Antichrist comes on the scene as the white horseman, the first seal. The fiery red horseman is wars, peace is taken from the earth. That creates scarcities, famines, and pestilences. That's the black horseman, a very dark time of the earth. And then now to deal with the whole situation, you've got this unholy global order with the church and state relationship of the Antichrist and the harlot going on to deal with that sort of thing. Now remember, this is a time when lawlessness and supernatural deception, things like this, are no longer being restrained. So it's a really bizarre point in time. So I'm just trying to lay the groundwork of what the world looks like at this time. And then here comes this death and Hades.
And I'm listening to you, and I'm thinking back, and I'm thinking, okay, we have the white horse Antichrist, we have the red horse war. And at that point, I'm thinking, wow, the Old Testament speaks, for example, Ezekiel 38 and Psalm 83, and all these Middle Eastern wars. Zechariah talks about wars, and all the minor prophets. None of those wars have happened yet. The red horse has not ridden forth yet.
Yeah, and I believe that I believe Psalm 83, for instance, and Ezekiel 38 are pre-tribulation events, and if they haven't happened by the time the fiery red horseman enters onto the scene, they would more than likely be put into that category right there where they're involved with those wars that are sweeping through the earth.
And that's an important thing to remember based on your thesis. And then you have the third seal, of course, the things that accompany war, the black horse, which is total economic collapse, chaos. And now comes the fourth seal, verses 7 and 8 of Revelation 6. And when he had opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth beast say, "Come and see." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell, or Hades, followed with him. And power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth to kill with the sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth. And that's a mouthful. There's a lot going on there.
Right, and so I've said previously stated that Isaiah 28 talked about the other party being death and hell, or death and Sheol. And now we're talking about here they arrive on the scene. They don't even arrive on the scene till the fourth horseman. And basically it's the same words, death and Hades in the Greek.
Same words that Isaiah used in Isaiah 28.
Yeah, and so, dear viewer, you might be going, oh, so you're now saying that death, the fourth horseman, is the other party on the false covenant, and I am. And you may be thinking, well, what a stretch that is, right? But I tell you, I go through this meticulously in the research in the Apocalypse Road book and DVD. So presuming I'm correct, dear viewer, let's pick it up from here. They now show up on the scene, and it says they have authority, you read, over a quarter of the earth to kill. It doesn't necessarily say they're killing a quarter of the earth, which has been commonly taught. It says they have authority over a quarter of the earth. It's a vast network to accomplish their means. In other words, to promote their agenda, to promote their false gospel. It's religious because death and Hades are dealing with the soul. Hades is dealing with the souls of men and women. So we've got a situation now that tells me that now we've got the Antichrist on the scene, the first horseman. Israel is already in the scene, as we know. They're one of the signatories. Now we've got the other signatory, so you really probably couldn't even have the false covenant signed until you get the scourge being perpetrated by death and Hades, the fourth horseman.
Right.
So now you can have the false covenant signed. But technically we got another problem because the fifth seal, Gary, if you want to read that, is
Yeah.
dealing with another clue that we haven't even probably even entered the tribulation yet by what these fifth seal saints are asking God.
Yeah, and I want to say this clearly, and Bill is saying that the four horsemen of the apocalypse occur prior to the 7-year
I
tribulation.
believe the opening of the seals all the way through the fifth seal happen in this vastly overlooked gap period we're talking about on this show. I believe they carry over into the tribulation, but the point of difference between many of our colleagues is that they believe all the seal judgments happen in the tribulation, usually in the first half. And I'm saying I don't think that's feasibly sound when we look at this way and dissect it this way.
Okay, so we come to the fifth seal now. And this is quite different from the first four seals. It says, and when he had opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of them that were slain for the word of God, for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, how long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth? And that's the big question, how long, O Lord? And why do they ask that?
Isn't that interesting? Right.
Yeah.
You know, we've talked about this in the past, Gary. If let's just presume we were among the fifth seal saints, and of course we believe we'll be raptured, and this is happening subsequent.
Right.
But you know, we would be astute to say, hey, listen, the false covenant has just been confirmed between Israel and, well, in this case, we're going to say the harlot world religion. And we're going to say, hey, we can start calendaring. We got 7 years left. We would not need to ask God, how long until you're going to avenge our blood? These are people who have accepted the Lord in the gap. The rapture's already happened.
Yeah.
And they've died for their faith.
So let me put a question. From your perspective, are they saying, how long is it going to be until you begin your work in the 7-year period? They're saying that in effect, that the 7 years hasn't begun yet.
I believe that's exactly what they're saying. As a matter of fact, if you read God's response to them, read the final verses there. I think it's verse 10 and 11 there.
Yeah, verse
11.
11.
Look what God says to them, and I think this breaks it down for us.
Well, and the next verse says, white robes were given unto every one of them. And it was said to them they should rest yet for a little season, until their fellow servants also and their brethren that should be killed as they were should be fulfilled. So there's yet a little time here, a little season.
Well, this is an interesting response.
It is.
They get white garments, which represents they're saved. And so it's clear that these are saved individuals. They have already been slain for their faith. But they have not been slain during the tribulation period. They're concerned for their other family members or whatever that might be slain by the same, and it's going to be the harlot, and I'll explain why in a moment. They're concerned about that, how much longer this perilous stuff is going to continue, and the Bible says 3 important things. You need to rest a little while longer because there's 3 groups of martyred believers after the rapture. Mm-hmm. One is the fifth seal saints. They die in the gap period between the rapture and the tribulation. He says your fellow servants who will die in the first, I believe this saying in the first half of the tribulation, also dying for their faith, and their brethren of the fellow servants. So I believe are the saints who actually die, get beheaded for not taking the mark of the beast in the second half of the tribulation, because you have 2 killing campaigns going on in the book of Revelation after the rapture. You have the harlot world religion. In Revelation 17:6, it says she is drunk with the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus. And I think the Jews are concerned about that overflowing scourge. They don't want to be the third victim and the blood of the Jews. Mm-hmm. That's why they sign a covenant with the harlot. And then you have the Antichrist. The 10 kings and the Antichrist from Revelation 17:16 will have the harlot desolated. She will be a problem. And the Antichrist will then come in and want to put forward his campaign of world dominance. And we go to Revelation 13, and it says that people who don't take his mark on their hand or on their right hand of their forehead will be killed. Revelation 20 says they're actually beheaded. So you got 2 killing crusades, killing jihads, if you will. I guess that's more of an Islamic term. I want to be careful because I don't believe this is Islam. But you got 2 killing crusades going on in the book of Revelation, killing the fifth seal saints, their fellow servants.
I'll take
and
you
their
back
brethren.
there. You said you didn't believe it was Islam because you believe that by this time there have been some wars that have pretty much wiped out the Islamic forces.
Well, maybe that was a slip that would be good to segue into this right now, because there is people who do believe the Antichrist will be Islamic and that the harlot will be Islam and basically centered out of Mecca. A couple things on that. First of all, I do believe Psalm 83, which is 10 populations that are predominantly Muslim, and Ezekiel 38, which is 9 populations predominantly Muslim, apart from Russia, will have been defeated by this time. And now that would represent about 600 million Muslims affected out of the 1.6 billion Muslims in the world. And at that point in time, they're going to be questioning Allah's Akbar, Allah's greatness. And this is sort of the core countries where Islam was founded and stuff like that. So there's many reasons why I would deviate from the thinking that this is Islam and stuff like that. I personally propose through sound research that this is real clear in the book of Revelation chapter 17. I gave my arguments for that. And so basically, this is who Israel's signing a covenant with. It's in my estimation. And then we get into the motivation and the true content of the false covenant. We will start to understand why these are the two parties, which is revolutionary because no one's really, in my estimation, talked about the harlot being the other party. When you look at the true content of the false covenant, you see that Israel is having to negotiate for their third temple with Gentiles in Revelation chapter 11. Matter of fact, if you go to Revelation chapter 11, the first clue we have in what is the true content of the false covenant, our first clue of the first half of the tribulation in the book of Revelation, after the covenant is confirmed and the tribulation starts, we go to Revelation 11, and it's John running around measuring for the temple, which tells me as a clue that part of the true content of the false covenant is the Jews want to build their temple. And why do they want to build their temple? Because when they build their temple, they believe the Messiah will come, and he will lead them into the Messianic kingdom, which is a high point of Old Testament prophecy. And there's a problem because there's an overflowing scourge going on, another false gospel out there. The fifth seal saints aren't buying into it, and they're losing their life for it. The Jews aren't going to buy into it because they're going to feel empowered. They're going to want to build their temple. They're going to want to bring their Messiah. They're going to want to start their sacrifices and offerings. But there's a problem with Revelation 11 because it says now the Jews have to negotiate with the Gentiles. It says you can measure the temple, but don't measure the outer court. It's going to be given to the Gentiles in Revelation 11. And they will trodden the holy city of Jerusalem for 3.5 years. First time the Jews have ever had to negotiate with Gentiles to build a temple. That's because right now in the old city of Jerusalem, you got 4 quarters: the Jewish, the Armenian, the Christian, and the Muslim quarters. After Psalm 83 and Ezekiel 38, the Muslim quarter is probably not going to be a big deal. After the rapture, the Christian and Armenian quarters will probably not be a big deal. I think what's going to happen, because a lot of those Christians will be taken out.
And what you're really talking about is the woman, the harlot on the beast, representing a harlot world religion.
Right.
And you defined that as you go into your book. And again, I have to say that if you haven't heard this thesis advanced, you might want to be patient as Bill takes time to expound on this.
It's so complex, and in a half-hour show we can only do so much. But the point is, Israel signs a covenant. It enables them to build their temple. We've got proof text in Isaiah 28. Also, we've got Daniel 9 also has a proof text too, because that they got their temple there, and the Antichrist goes in and stops the sacrifices and the offerings. So we've got to look at, I think that has a lot to do with the content of the false covenant. A lot of people think it's peace between the Palestinians and the Jews, but it's not in this Bible that it says it's between the Arabs and the Jews. There's clues saying it's dealing with that temple.
So let's go back and reiterate now. We just have a very few minutes here to kind of backspace to where we started. The rapture hasn't occurred yet, and when it does, that's going to open the floodgates for a number of subsequent events, and go through those again the way you did before.
Yeah, you're going to have the first thing Satan does now, because there's no more restraint on him, according to 2 Thessalonians 2. It'll be a time when supernatural signs and wonders are going to come out, lawlessness will abound, the lawless one will be revealed. And so the first thing he does in his opportunity to present his closing arguments, he brings his point man, the white horseman, the Antichrist, on the scene. Lawlessness then is abounding, and so it leads to wars in Revelation with the second horseman. Yeah. It then leads to scarcities and famines and troubles throughout the world, which needs to be harnessed. And that's when you have a global system, the harlot world religion coming in as death and hell and Hades. And she is now perpetrating an overflowing scourge, and one of the victims of that is the fifth seal saints, because they're not buying into her counterfeit gospel. So then you have Israel saying, we're not buying into it either. We need to sign a covenant with them, but we have to negotiate with them because they have claims on Jerusalem, and so we want to build our temple, but we have to deal with their claims. And so this is where they come. And so the Jews are wanting to build their temple because when they build their temple, the Messiah will come. He will lead them into the kingdom, and he will do away with the overflowing scourge and the falsities of the harlot world religion. That will be their mindset. And that's why Isaiah 28:15 says they will make this covenant under lies and falsehood. It'll be politically expedient for them to covenant with her so that they can bring their Messiah, and he'll toast that whole problem over there.
Now, I think you've given us more than enough to chew on at this point. We have listened attentively. And by the way, you've devoted a lot of thought to this, which, by the way, contains many more details than we can bring you in a less than 30-minute broadcast. I just want to mention the book is called Apocalypse Road, the DVD, the same title. But first, I want to talk about, we have on the table in front of me, we have 4 books and 4 DVDs. That represents your complete work.
It does.
And we have these for folks right here at Prophecy Watchers. And what I'm going to do today is something I don't think we've ever done anything like this before, but we're going to offer you the complete Bill Salus collection. 4 books, 4 DVDs, and you'll find those in the online bookstore, prophecywatchers.com. Just hit the online bookstore button, scroll down to Bill Salus, and you'll find the complete Bill Salus collection. You buy 4 books, 4 DVDs, and you get Bill's latest work absolutely free as a bonus. And you're going to save about $100 in the process of this purchase. And what it'll do is give you a long view of what Bill has been working on now for how many years?
Well, I've been working on this for about 15 years overall.
And he's devoted a tremendous amount of thought to very complex ideas. And I think you'll really get a lot out of following his work. Again, Apocalypse Road, the book, the DVD, yours absolutely free. And when you purchase the Bill Salus collection, you'll save about $100 in total purchase price there. And you'll be helping Bill to move his ideas forward. You'll be helping us at Prophecy Watchers to move these ideas out into the general public, because what we are involved in here is evangelism. We feel the study of Bible prophecy is one of the best ways to bring people to Christ, right?
Right, and the point is with all of these works is it's going to compel people to be called to evangelism now, because what we're talking about is a perilous period of time, not even in the tribulation yet, in the gap. And, you don't want your loved ones to have to go through that period of time. So now is the time to redeem the time and to witness to them. And it's exactly the main goal of what these works are.
The rapture of the church, in my opinion, and I think you would agree with this, could occur at any moment. It is a signless event. It is an imminent event. It is our blessed hope. And we've got to work like everything, because the opposing ideas are out there. The world, I think you've probably noticed, is getting darker and darker, and we want to bring the light of the love of the Lord Jesus Christ and His gospel to as many people as possible before that day comes when the church is taken out. And we're looking forward to that, Bill, but we really want to make sure that a lot of people go with us, right?
Absolutely. And also the works of Apocalypse Road will give an alternative view for people who are debating whether there's a mid-trib or a pre-wrath rapture, because this explains how this fits instead of that.
The Bill Salus collection, and by the way, purchase that and get his latest work absolutely free, the book, the DVD. And I got to tell you, Bill challenges traditional thinking, and it's not something that he's just kind of come up with overnight. He's worked long and hard to develop this thesis, and we do appreciate what you're doing. I have long thought that there has to be some kind of a staging period after the church leaves and before the tribulation. And you've come along and put a lot of detail in there.
Yeah, and I think the evidence is pretty clear as I present in these books that is not going to be a 24-hour window. There is going to be probably several years there. And in a split second with the rapture, now these people get left behind and get plunged into this perilous period. And we're not even talking about the tribulation.
It's been an interesting conversation. Bill Salus, God bless you and yours and your continuing work.
Thanks.
And we're going to see you October 13th through 15th at the Blessed Hope Prophecy Conference, and you're going to be presenting there some of your work, right?
Absolutely. I am so looking forward to that.
I am too. I'm Gary Stearman. Thanks for joining us today. Keep watching. We are. Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com, where you can sign up for our free email newsletter. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.